back to session 2 of the Bible puzzle, and thank you guys for being here tonight. Thank you for bringing your notebooks, your workbooks with you. We began last week, and the Bible puzzle is a brand new study for us. Basically, the Bible puzzle comes from the idea that there are a lot of people who feel like they fit in one of two categories. Either one, they feel like they're kind of a Bible beginner. Maybe they haven't spent a lot of time studying the Bible in their life. Maybe they didn't grow up in church. Or they're just not confident about their Bible knowledge. That's one group. A second group are people maybe who have studied the Bible quite a bit over their lifetime, but they say, I think it would be good for me to have a refresher on some of the basics, some of the foundational things that come with the Bible. So that is why we've written this study. That is why we're going to do this study over the remaining 15 weeks. Will you give those to Jason? Jason will take care of that. And I lost my train of thought. That's okay. The bottom line is we're going to cover the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation starting tonight. I mean, we're going to hit Genesis chapter 1 and we're going to work through 11. We're going to drink from a fire hose again tonight, okay? I know it can be a little overwhelming. I just want you to take in as much as you can. I want you to write down as many notes as you can. And of course, when we're done, if you have any questions for me, you are always welcome to ask, okay? All right, last week was our first session, and we covered a lot. We learned that the Bible is not merely one book, it is a what? All right, it is a library. And we learned that there are how many books in that library? 66. Very good. How many books are in the Old Testament? 39. How many books are in the New Testament? 27. We also learned 5 basic divisions of the Old Testament. Let's see what we remember, okay? So they are the law, history, poetry and wisdom, major prophets, minor prophets. All right, very good. Let's say those together. Law, history, poetry, major prophets, minor prophets. Very good. That's the 5 divisions of the Old Testament. If you know that really can help you have some perspective on what is happening in the Old Testament. There are also 5 basic divisions of the New Testament. They are, let's see if you can fill in the blanks. They are the Gospels, Acts, Paul's letters, general letters, or Revelation. Now, it occurs to me, if you're brand new tonight, you might be thinking, Bible beginners, these people all know all this stuff already. How do they have this memorized? Well, we said it about 100 times last week, didn't we? And I've seen some of you doing this in the hallways. And okay, so we worked hard to memorize this stuff. We're going to keep memorizing it tonight as well. Let's say it one more time together, the 5 divisions of the New Testament. Gospels, Acts, Paul's letters, general letters, and Revelation. All right, very good. We also learned that all 66 books contribute to one unified story. And we summarize that story with 4 movements. And with those movements, we did some motions to help us remember. It is C-R-R-R, okay? C-R-R-R. Let's see if we can do them. First of all, we have creation. So we're making like a globe, creation. Then we have rebellion, like we're pushing away. Then we have redemption. We have a little bit more room to spread our arms tonight. It was pretty tight last week, wasn't it? And then did anybody remember the last R? To bring your hands together for restoration. That's right. Let's do them again. Creation, rebellion, redemption, restoration. Do it again. Creation, rebellion, redemption, restoration. And again, those 4 movements, they're going to show up again and again throughout this study. They are really the framework that's going to help us understand where the individual pieces of the Bible belong. So tonight, we're going to begin putting some of those pieces together. And we're going to begin where the Bible begins with the book of Genesis. Does anybody know, and this is not a question you need to know, but does anybody know what the word Genesis means? Okay, good. The word Genesis means beginning. It also has a connotation of origin or birth. Okay, so beginning, origin, or birth. And I want to encourage you again tonight to write in any extra notes, anything that you think might be important. I think it's really helpful for you to write in those notes. So Genesis tells us a lot, actually. In Genesis, we learn about the beginning of the universe, of humanity, of marriage, of work, of sin, of death, the beginning of nations, and the beginning of God's plan to rescue His creation. Genesis contains 50 chapters. You can write that in. Genesis contains 50 chapters. The book can be divided into basically two major sections, okay? Genesis 1 through 11 focuses broadly on God and the whole human race. Then Genesis 12 through 50, and I know that's a lot, that covers a lot of ground, narrows its focus to one man and his family, Abraham, and his descendants. So that's what about 2/3 of Genesis really is all about. Now tonight, as I mentioned, we're going to cover Genesis chapters 1 through 11. A big section of lots and lots of important stuff. Now, that may sound impossible to cover 11 chapters. I can almost promise you, you never cover 11 chapters at one time in a typical Bible study, in a community group, in a Sunday school. But I want you to remember, our goal is not to study every verse and every detail. Our goal is to build a map, right? We're trying to put together a big puzzle. We want to identify the major people, the major events, the major themes, and how this section and how this session fits within the Bible's larger story. And so as we work through your notes tonight, there are going to be places where you're going to fill in the blanks. And I want to encourage you to do that because I actually believe that this notebook can be a really helpful resource for you in the future to go back to and to see, okay, we're studying Genesis chapter 5 this week in my community group. I'm going to go back and I want to look and I want to see what the highlights of Genesis 1 through 11 are. So I have a little bit of context and understanding before I go in to study Genesis 5. All right, tonight's section can be remembered with 4 simple Genesis locations. So we're going to think in terms of 4 locations in the Bible. We start with the garden, then the fall when Adam and Eve sinned. We have the flood, and then the tower. And the tower is an interesting story that a lot of us may not know much about, but we'll talk just a little bit about it tonight. Now, one thing that some people helped me remember last week is I went a little bit fast as you guys are trying to fill in the blanks. So if I get to going too fast, just raise your hand up or give me a dirty look. I respond to that too, and I'll try my best. I want to go slow. I want you to get all the blanks filled in. Okay. So let's go over these 4 locations. We're going to hit them again and again and again tonight. Say them with me. Garden, fall, flood, tower. All right, say it again. Garden, fall, flood, tower. All right. Now, the garden shows us the world as God created it. That's what the garden is all about. The fall shows us humanity's rebellion. The flood, Noah and the ark, the flood shows us the seriousness of sin and both the judgment and grace of God all at the same time. It's a really important story. And then the tower, talking about the Tower of, anybody fill in the blank? The Tower of Babel. Okay, the Tower of Babel shows us human pride spreading throughout civilization. So here's our big question that we're kind of working through tonight. And this is top of page 1 in your notes. Here's the big question. If God created everything good, why is the world so broken? Now think about that for a second. If God created everything good, why is the world so broken? That's an important question, isn't it? Because we look around the world and we see that things are clearly not right. Is that something we can agree with? I mean, in our culture today, it's hard to get a group of people to agree on almost anything. But do we agree that there's something wrong with our world? We see war and violence and disease and abuse. We see addiction, hatred, loneliness, broken relationships, pain, and death. And sometimes people ask, if God made this world, why did He make it like this? Right? Why would God make such a messed up world? But here is a really important thing to understand. The Bible's answer to that question is, He didn't. He did not make a broken world. God created the world, and there's a word that is associated with the way that He created the world. Can anybody give it to me? Good. Good. He made the world, and He made it good. All right? The brokenness that we experience is the result of humanity's rebellion against the good rule of God, and that's what we're going to be learning about tonight. Almost everything we cover tonight has to do with that rebellion. So, let's begin with a word of prayer. Let's ask God to bless what we're doing tonight and to speak to us. Bow your heads with me if you would. Father, I thank You for bringing us together again. I thank You for each and every person here tonight. I thank You for Your word and for the opportunity to understand it. And as we study the very beginning of the Bible, help us to grow to know who You are, who You created us to be. Help us to understand what went wrong and why we need Your rescue. God, give us wisdom. Give us humility. Help the pieces fit together. And help us see Jesus throughout this story. We ask all of this in His name. Amen. Amen. All right, so we come to section 1, the garden. God creates a good world. And in your notes, there's a fill in the blank there with a C. We'll come back to that in just a minute. I want to begin with the opening words of the Bible. We're going to have all the scripture I read to you tonight on the screen behind me. It will be maybe a little bit hard for you to try to read from your own Bible, but of course you're willing always. You're welcome always to go back and read through any scripture that we've covered. Genesis 1:1 says this, very, very familiar verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Why don't you guys repeat that with me? Say what you see. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The most famous line of the most famous book probably ever written in history, and we have the privilege to be able to repeat it, to read it, to try to understand it. Now, I mentioned this last week, but I'm going to hit this one more time because I think it's really important. Notice what the Bible does not do in Genesis 1:1. The Bible does not begin by trying to prove that God exists, does it? It begins simply with God. In the beginning, God. Before the universe existed, God was already there. Before the sun, the moon, the stars existed, God was there. Before humanity, see if you can fill in the blank, God was there. God, listen to me, God does not come from creation. Creation comes from God. And that gives us one of the most basic distinctions in the entire Bible, and it's our first of 4 Bible truths that we're going to cover tonight for section 1, and that is this, that God is the creator, everything else is creation. So this is Bible truth number 1, God is the creator, everything else is creation. So, God is not part of the universe. There are some religions that say that, but that is not true. God is not the sun. We don't worship the sun, do we? God is not the moon. God is not nature. He created nature, but God is not nature. God is not humanity. God created all of those things, and because God created everything, listen to me, everything ultimately belongs to Him. So Genesis 1 describes God bringing order beauty and life into creation. God creates light. Do you remember how the order went? He separates the waters. He forms dry land. He creates vegetation. He creates the sun, moon, and stars. He fills the water with living creatures. He fills the sky with birds. He fills the land with animals. And after each stage of creation, we repeatedly read these words. And God saw that it was what? Good. That's it. All right. So after creating humanity, Genesis 1:31 says this, "Then God looked over all He had made, and He saw that it was very good." There's something important there. Not merely good, but what? Very good. As He made all of other creation, it was good, but after He had created humankind, He said it was very good. And that gives us our second major truth tonight. God created everything good. So I want you to write that in. Anytime that I give you one of these major truths or major key words or phrases, these are really important. I mean, they are really important. But it's not just about filling in the blank. I want you to try to internalize them. I want you to walk away tonight with some kind of understanding that everything God created was good, very good. And that means, because it's good, everything that the physical world, despite what you may hear, despite what some people may preach, the physical world is not evil. Our bodies are not evil. I was kind of taught that a little bit growing up. Your body is evil and it's something to overcome. Work is not evil. Well, I guess it depends on where you work, huh? Marriage is not evil. Do you hear me? All right? Food is not evil. Creation itself is a gift from God. Now, that does not mean that everything in creation functions today exactly as God originally intended it, does it? So there are some of those things I listed, the physical world, our bodies, work, marriage, food, that can be used for evil. They can be treated in an evil way, but they were never intended for evil. And we're going to see why that changed tonight. But Genesis begins with a good God and a good world, and it's really important for us to understand that's where things began. Here's our third major truth. Humanity is created in God's image. All right? Humanity is created in God's image. When God created, or when He creates humanity, the story actually slows down. It's kind of interesting. Genesis 1:26 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make human beings in our image to be like us.'" Then verse 27 says, "So God created human beings in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them." And this is one of the most important statements that the Bible makes about human beings. Human beings are made in God's image. But what in the world does that mean? Does that mean that God physically looks like us? And if He does, which one of us does He look like? George Clooney? Brad Pitt? I mean, I see some people nodding yes. That's called heresy. Write that word down. Okay, I'm just kidding. But here's the reality. No, God doesn't look like us. The Bible tells us that God is spirit. So to be created in God's image means that humanity was created to reflect God and to represent Him within His creation. Think about that. Think about an ambassador to a king. An ambassador is not the king, but the ambassador represents the king. Human beings were created to live under God's authority and to represent His rule in the world. So I'm going to give you a very simple acrostic to help remember what it means to bear God's image. Okay, we're going to use the letters I-M-A-G-E. I want you to write these in. Here we go. First of all, I stands for identity. Identity comes from God. Identity. We do not create our own deepest identity. Our identity begins with the God who made us. You are not ultimately defined by your job, by your income, by your appearance, by your success, by your failure. Let me tell you something. You're not defined primarily by your gender. You're not defined by your sexuality. That's not who you are. The God who created you gets to tell you who you are. And who are you? You are a human being created by God and made in His image. I stands for identity. M stands for made. We are made to know God. We're made to know God. Human beings were created, this is very important, for a relationship with God. We were made to know Him, to love Him and be loved by Him. We were not created merely to exist. We were created to know our Creator. M stands for made to know God. A stands for authority. Authority exercised under God. God gives humanity authority over the earth, but human authority was always meant to remain under God's authority. Remember, human beings are not owners. We are only, say it a little louder because you knew it. You just weren't sure if I was asking for the right thing. Human beings are not owners. We are only stewards. And if you hang around for about another couple of months, you're going to learn all about that. All right? Here at OBC. All right. The G stands for God's character reflected. God's character reflected. Human beings were created to reflect God's wisdom, goodness, justice, creativity, love, and faithfulness. Now listen, we don't reflect those qualities perfectly, but we were created to display them to the world around us. The E in image stands for every person bears God's image. All right? Every person bears God's image. And that means every human life possesses dignity and value. Every person, not just healthy people, not just wealthy people, not just powerful people, not just people who look just like us, not just people who agree with us. Every human being bears God's image. Because human value is not earned, it is given by the Creator. Isn't that kind of a beautiful thing to think about? So let's say the acrostic together. You've got it written down there. I-M-A-G-E. Identity comes from God. We're made to know God. Authority is exercised under God. God's character reflected, and every person bears God's image. Very good. Here's our fourth major truth. Humanity is given purpose. In these early chapters of Genesis, we find that humanity is given purpose. First, God gives humanity work to do. We're given work to do. Genesis 2 says God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden to tend and to watch over it. And I want you to notice that work existed before sin entered the world. Sometimes people will say, well, the only reason we have to work is because Adam and Eve sinned. No, actually, God created work first, and then sin came later. Work was part of God's good creation. Sin made work frustrating. It made it harder, but meaningful work itself is a gift from God. God created humanity to know Him, represent Him, care for His creation, build, create, cultivate, multiply, and even fill the earth. These are things that God tells Adam and Eve to do. Genesis 2 also introduces, or God introduces, marriage. So that's pretty important. Early on, the second chapter of the Bible, we're introduced to marriage. God says, it is not good for the man to be alone. And then God created the woman. Genesis describes the man and woman living together in unity with God and within creation. Genesis 2:25 says, now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. So think about that. Genesis 2, no shame, no fear, no hiding, no blame, no violence, no death. Everything was as it should be. And that's our first location. Does anybody remember what the first location is? Starts with a G, the garden. All right, the garden. And the garden belongs within the first movement of the Bible story, which looks like this. And what's the word for that? Creation. So if you want to go back to section 1, the heading, section 1, where it says the garden, God creates a good world, write in the word creation. Okay? That's where the garden fits. Let's do the motion. Everybody together, do it with me. Ready? And say it. Creation. Good. God created everything good. Human beings were made in God's image. We were created to know God, represent Him, and live under His rule. But Genesis 2, unfortunately, is followed by Genesis 3. And here's where everything gets messed up. All right? So quickly, here's where everything goes off the rails. Here's section 2 tonight, the fall. The fall. Humanity rebels against God. So Genesis 3 introduces us to the serpent. The serpent, a representation of Satan, comes to the woman and begins with a question. Did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden? Now, if you know anything about Genesis, is that what God said? No. God had given Adam and Eve the fruit of every tree except one tree, and He said, this is the one tree I do not want you to eat from. The serpent takes God's generous provision and makes God sound restrictive. He said, you can eat from every tree I've created in the world except for this one. And Satan says, He won't let you have anything. He's keeping everything from you. Why? Because the serpent wants them to wonder this: can God really, truly be trusted? Do you see that? That's what the serpent wanted the man and the woman to ask. Can we really trust God? Is God holding something back? Would we be better off making our own decisions? And then the serpent directly contradicts God. God had warned them that rebellion would bring death. But the serpent says, no, you won't die. That's not true. Listen to Genesis 3:5. He says, God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be, what's that word? Like God, knowing both good and evil. Do you see the temptation? God cannot be trusted. You should take control. You should decide good and evil for yourself. You should become your own authority. And here's the tragic irony. Adam and Eve were already made in God's image. God had already given them dignity and purpose and authority, but instead of receiving life as a gift from God, they attempted to take God's place. Do you see that that's really what happened in Genesis chapter 3? And that gives us a clear definition of sin. So I want you to write this in. Sin is rebellion, remember the motion, rebellion against the rightful rule of God. Sin is rebellion against the rightful rule of God. Sin includes sinful actions. Lying is sin. Stealing is sin. Adultery and hatred and violence is sin. But beneath every sinful action is a deeper rebellion against God. That rebellion says, I will decide what is right. I will decide what is wrong. I will determine how I live. I will be my own authority. You guys, I'll give you a second to write those in. I will decide what is right. I will decide what is wrong. I will determine how I live. I will be my own authority. You know what that sounds like to me? A 3-year-old. Right? And some 50-year-olds that I know, okay? Well, Adam and Eve eventually, you know what they do? They eat the fruit, and immediately everything begins to break. They begin to experience shame. Write that in. Before sin, Genesis said, they were naked and they felt no shame. After sin, they became aware of their nakedness and attempt to cover themselves. For the first time, they experienced shame. They also experienced fear. They hear God walking in the garden. Now, previously, God had walked with them and they didn't think twice about it. But now they think, what do we do? They hide. Before sin, God's presence was their joy. After sin, God's presence becomes something they actually fear. Think about that. They also experience blame. This is one of our favorites, right? God asked Adam what happened. Adam points and what does he say? It was that woman. It was that woman you gave me, who gave me the fruit, right? Adam blames Eve. And if you listen carefully, he's also blaming God when he says, that woman you gave me. And then God asks Eve, and Eve says, the serpent deceived me. Nobody takes responsibility. And we've been blaming one another for our choices ever since, haven't we? That's just how human nature goes. They also experience broken relationships. Broken relationships. Sin, this is important, because we think of sin as something, this is something God says don't do. But in reality, we need to understand sin breaks our relationships with Him and with one another. It damages every relationship we have. The relationship between humanity and God is broken. The relationship between the man and the woman is damaged. The relationship between humanity and creation is damaged. So shame and fear and blame and conflict and pain and frustration and death, all of these enter the human experience through rebellion. Now in the New Testament, Romans 5:12 says, when Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. The Bible's explanation for the brokenness of the world begins here. We live in God's good creation, but that creation has been damaged by human rebellion. And so humanity is sent from the garden. Humanity is sent away. God sends Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, never to return. They lose access to the tree of life. They're removed from the place of God's presence. This is extremely important because the rest of the Bible is going to tell the story of how God makes a way for sinful people to return to His presence. In fact, starting next week, we're going to be learning and thinking about that. The tabernacle, if you know that word, if you don't know it, it's okay. We're going to learn it. The tabernacle will point towards it. The temple will point towards it. The sacrifices will point towards it. Jesus will accomplish it, and Revelation will complete it. But at this point in the story, human beings are now outside of the garden, separated from God, subject to death, living in creation damaged by sin. That is the second location. The first one was the garden. Our second location is the fall. Okay, so the fall. And the fall belongs within the Bible's second movement, which is rebellion. All right, so if you want to go back and write that in, that's the R next to the title in section 2. Rebellion. Let's do our first two motions again. Here we go. Creation, rebellion. Do it again. Creation, rebellion. Now, does the story end there? Genesis 3. No. Even in the middle of judgment, God actually gives a promise. The first promise of rescue for mankind. In Genesis 3:15, God speaks to the serpent. God says there's going to be conflict between the serpent and the offspring of the woman. The serpent will try to strike his heel, but the descendant of the woman will crush the serpent's head. It's a pretty amazing image of what's coming in the future. At this point, Adam and Eve, they have no idea what God's talking about. They don't understand every detail of that promise, but God announced that evil will not win forever. That one day a human descendant will defeat the serpent, Satan. Christians have traditionally called Genesis 3:15, where God explains this, the proto-evangelium, which you don't have to know You can write it down if you like, but it simply means the first announcement of the gospel. All the way back in Genesis chapter 3, the proto-evangelium, the first announcement of the gospel. Now think about this. Now come on, this is where Bible nerds like me get all excited, all right? Humanity has just rebelled. They have distrusted God. They have broken His commands. They have hidden. They have blamed one another. And before they ever leave the garden they've been kicked out of, God is already pointing toward rescue. You see, God judges sin, but God also pursues sinners. And that is incredibly important for us to understand. So now we already have creation, rebellion, and the first promise of what? Redemption. Very good. But the problem of sin doesn't stop with Adam and Eve. It actually spreads. Section 3. Sin spreads from the heart to the human race. Sin spreads from the heart to the human race. Genesis 4 introduces us to Adam and Eve's sons, named Cain and Abel. Maybe you've heard their story. Cain becomes angry because God accepts Abel's offering, but does not accept Cain's offering. God warns Cain. Listen to this. Genesis 4:7. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. That's a pretty vivid picture, isn't it? Sin is like a dangerous animal waiting at the door to attack you. So Cain is warned, write this in, Cain is warned, but he does not listen. I think I skipped one. God warns Cain, and then Cain is warned, but he does not listen. So Cain, do you know this story? Cain takes Abel into a field, his brother, and does what to him? Murders him. He murders him. Think about how quickly the effects of sin spread. Right? It did not take long. Genesis 3, humanity rebels against God. Genesis 4, a brother murders his own brother. And here's what we need to learn. Sin never stays isolated. What begins as rebellion against God spreads into violence against people. And remember, Abel bears God's image, right? Violence against another person. Any person is an attack against someone who bears the image of God. So God confronts Cain. Write that in. God confronts Cain. God asks him, "Where is your brother?" Cain basically says, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The first instance of smart aleckness, right? And the answer to that question, by the way, is yes. Human beings were created to care for one another. But sin turns brothers into enemies, doesn't it? Still, even after Cain's sin, God shows him mercy. Cain faces consequences, but this is important. God actually protects him from being killed. And again, we see both the judgment and the mercy of God at the same time. By the end of Genesis 4, violence has grown even worse. A descendant of Cain named Lamech brags about killing someone. So think about that. Cain committed murder and tried to hide it. Lamech commits murder and celebrates it. Sin has officially become part of the human culture at that point. Here's the progression. I want you to remember this. Heart, home, humanity. Heart, home, humanity. Sin begins in the human heart. Think about our culture. It often damages the home, and then it spreads throughout humanity. Can you guys see that in our culture today? Heart, home, culture. Say those words with me. Heart, home, humanity. Say it again. Heart, home, humanity. You can fill in this blank for section 3. Sin spreads from the heart to the human race. That's rebellion. Okay? Creation, rebellion. Now, by Genesis 6, the situation has become devastating. So now we're at section 4, the flood. God judges sin, but preserves a family. This is Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, and it says this: "The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and He saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil." And verse 6 says, "And it broke God's heart." And that line matters. Human sin, again, does not just violate a rule. Human sin grieves God. The creation God called good has become filled with evil. Genesis 6:11 says, "Now God saw that the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence." Do you remember what God told humanity to do in Genesis 1? He told them to go fill the earth, right? Fill the earth. By Genesis 6, humanity has filled the earth with violence. So God determines to judge the world through a flood. Now, most of us probably encountered the story of Noah first time in the children's Bible, maybe in Sunday school or vacation Bible school. And I think we picture, a large boat. I should have put an image up here for you. Pairs of smiling, goofily smiling animals. Ooh, I'm a giraffe. Look at me. A rainbow, right? Something, some animal sticking its head out of the window of the ark. But I need you to hear me when I say this. The flood is not primarily a cute story about animals. We kind of get that wrong. It's a serious story about human wickedness. It's about God's judgment. It's also about God's grace. Genesis 6:8 says, "But Noah found favor with the Lord." God tells Noah to build an ark, a giant boat. Noah obeys. Noah and his family enter. The animals enter. The waters come. And the world as Noah knew it disappears beneath the flood. And this story teaches us several important things. These are some observations. And as we continue in the sessions ahead, in the weeks ahead, this is a lot of what we're going to do. I'm going to be kind of summarizing big chunks of Scripture, and I'm going to have you write down the observations that we make. I really want you to write them down as best you can. Here's the first one. God takes sin seriously. That's something we need to know and understand. God takes sin seriously. God is patient, but God is not indifferent. God is loving, but God is also just. Evil matters. Violence matters. Human beings are accountable to their Creator, but the flood also teaches us that God provides a way of rescue. So He takes sin seriously. He judges, but He provides a way of rescue. Noah is preserved because of God's grace. God judges the world, but God preserves a family. And through that family, God preserves the human race. Humanity experiences a new beginning. Write that in if you would. If you know the story, eventually the waters recede. Noah and his family step out on the dry ground. I have to assume they sang a song of some sort. And the language begins to sound very familiar. God blesses Noah. God tells Noah and his family to do what? Be fruitful and multiply. That sounds a lot like Genesis 1, doesn't it? We've already made a connection between Genesis 1 in the garden and where we're here now with Noah and his family being given the same blessing and the same instruction. Humanity receives a fresh beginning. So I'm thinking maybe the problem's solved. Maybe all humanity needed was a new environment. But almost immediately, Noah sins. They don't put that on a flannel board, I promise you. All right, if you know that story, it's ugly. Shame enters the story again. Family conflict follows very closely. Why? Because the deepest problem was not merely around humanity. This is something you've probably heard me teach at OBC. Can anybody tell me where the biggest problem is? If it's not around humanity, where is it? The deepest problem is inside humanity, okay? We've got to know that. We've got to understand that. And here's the lesson. A new environment cannot fix an old heart. A sinful heart. A new environment cannot fix an old heart. Humanity does not merely need better surroundings, better education, better laws, better technology. And listen, those things may be helpful, but they can't remove sin from the human heart. You know what we need? Redemption. Yeah, I love it. Redemption. We need God to change us from the inside out. So, God makes a covenant with Noah. God makes a covenant with Noah. After the flood, He makes a covenant. Do you remember what the word covenant means? I mentioned it last week. It's a binding relationship established through promises and commitments. Now, we're going to come back to the idea next session. But God promises, do you remember what He promised to Noah? That He would never destroy the earth again through a flood. That's the covenant He makes. And He gives a sign of that covenant. What is it? The rainbow. That's right. Genesis 9:13, I have placed my rainbow in the clouds. It is the sign of my covenant with you and with all of the earth. So that rainbow is a sign of God's promise, God's mercy, God's patience, and God's faithfulness. So when we think of the flood, we should remember two truths. God practices both judgment and grace. That's at the bottom of page 5. God practices both judgment and grace. God judges sin, but God graciously preserves Noah. Let's say those two things together. Judgment and grace. Say it again. Judgment and grace. Very good. Patience and faithfulness. Sorry. I went fast. I apologize. All right. So this idea of judgment and grace, and this story gives us our third location. We started with the garden, then the fall. Now we're to the what? The flood. And if you want to go back and fill in, this is the flood represents both rebellion and redemption. Do you see why? The flood represents rebellion in the sense that the wickedness of human hearts, but it also represents redemption, that God saved Noah and his family, and He kept His covenant with mankind. All right, so far we have the garden, the fall, and the flood, but unfortunately human rebellion just continues. And by Genesis 11, rebellion has become a united human project. All right? So this is section 5, the tower. Humanity tries to build life without God. I think this is an incredibly interesting story. Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, and it describes humanity settling together kind of in one place, coming together. They develop new building technology. It's all there in Genesis 11. They learned to make bricks and use tar as mortar. That was a big step forward. Now, understand, technology is not the problem. Bricks are not the problem. The problem is what humanity decides to do with them. Genesis 11:4 says, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky." Then they say, they will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the earth. Other translations say, let us make a name for ourselves. Do you see the problem? God had told humanity to fill the earth, the entire earth. They refused. God gave humanity the responsibility to live under His authority. They chose self-rule. God's name should be honored. They want to make their own name great. Do you see it? This is just Genesis 3 on a much larger scale. In the garden, 2 people rebelled against God. At Babel, human civilization organizes itself around rebellion against God. It's pretty amazing. They are saying this: we will build our own security. We will create our own greatness. We will make our own name. We will live without dependence on God. And listen to me. That is the spirit of Babel. And that spirit's still alive today. Human beings still attempt to build lives without God, don't they? And I know that because I spent part of my life trying to build my life without God. We look to things like money. You can write this in. Power. Technology. Popularity. And achievement. And that's just an Oakdale parent-teacher meeting across the street, okay? That's just the Oakdale pickup line right there, all right? Basically. And here's what happens. We begin believing that if we can build high enough, if we can earn enough, if we can know enough, if we can control enough, we will no longer need God. But created people cannot replace their Creator. God comes down in this story to see the city and the tower. And I love the irony of that language. Think about it. Humanity believes the tower reaches into the heavens. But God still has to do what to see it? He has to come down to see it. The greatest human achievement is still very, very small when compared with God. So what does God do? Some of you probably know His solution to this. God confuses their language. Do you know that prior to this point in the Bible, everyone spoke the same language? You didn't have any trouble understanding what somebody was going to say. But God confuses their language. Interestingly, today you can buy a program called Babel, and what is it supposed to help you do? Understand languages. It's actually the exact opposite of the point of Babel. I don't know, sounds demonic, but I'm not judging you, okay? All right, so He confuses their language. They can no longer understand one another, and then He scatters them throughout the earth, and the city becomes known as Babel. And that gives us our fourth location, the tower. So let's review all four. We said we started with the garden, the fall, the flood, and the tower. Say this with me one more time. The garden, the fall, the flood, the tower. And you can fill in the blank on page 6 where with rebellion. Because once again, the Tower of Babel represents rebellion against the authority and the rule of God. Now, real quickly, let's connect each location to its basic truth. The garden. God created a good world and made humanity in His image. That's the garden. The fall. Humanity rebelled against God's rightful rule. The flood. God judged human wickedness, but preserved Noah and his family. And then finally, the tower. Humanity united in pride, and God scattered the nations. And guys, if you can remember those four locations, the garden, the fall, the flood, the tower, you can remember the basic movement of the first 11 chapters of the Bible, of Genesis, okay? All right, let's go on to section 6. Genesis 1 through 11 explains why the rest of the Bible is necessary. I want you to stop and think about where the story stands at the end of Genesis 1. Humanity was created to live in God's presence, but now humanity is separated from God, right? Humanity was created to reflect God's character, but now humanity is filled with violence and pride. Humanity was created for life, but now death reigns. Humanity was created for unity, but now the nations have been, again, scattered. So the question hanging over Genesis 11, it looks pretty bad for mankind. The question is, what is God going to do? How will He rescue humanity? How will God defeat the serpent? How will God deal with sin? How will humanity return to God's presence? How will blessing return to the nations? And that's why Genesis 12, which we're going to look at next week, is such an important turning point in the Bible. In Genesis 11, humanity says, let us make a name for ourselves. In Genesis 12, God speaks to a man named Abram and says, I will make your name great. At Babel, humanity attempts to create blessing without God. To Abraham, God says, I will bless you. You don't need to bless yourself. I'm going to take care of you. At Babel, the nations are scattered. Through Abraham, God promises all the families on earth will be blessed through you. Do you see how the pieces connect? Do you see how the first 11 chapters connect to what we're going to start learning in chapter 12? Genesis 1 through 11 establishes the problem. Genesis 12 begins the next stage of God's answer. And the story moves from the whole world down to one man, from all the nations to one family. But God's purpose for that one family will still involve all nations. Next week, we're going to start following what a man who becomes known as, he starts as Abram, and he's known as what? Abraham and his family. Before we finish tonight, I want to try to connect Genesis 1:11. You know what? I think actually I'm going to skip this section. I'm going to go to section 8. So if you guys will skip that. You guys keep interrupting me and I'm running out of time. That was a joke. All right, let me give you the fill in the blanks for section 8. What Genesis 1 through 11 teaches us about ourselves. Number 1, you were created by God. Write that in if you would. Number 2, you bear God's image. Number 3, sin is deeper than bad behavior. Number 4, sin spreads. Remember that? Do you remember the 3 places? It starts in the heart, and where does it go? The home, and then to humanity. Very good, very good. Sin spreads. Number 5, God judges sin. We need to know that and understand that. There's a movement, within Christianity that would say, let's don't talk about that. Let's pretend as if, let's soften that a little bit, Listen, if we don't understand God's judgment, we don't understand God. The beautiful, amazing, important thing is to know that He judges sin and He also shows grace. It's a both and situation. That's number 6. God shows grace. All right. Let us see. Well, first of all, let me say this. We just covered a whole bunch of stuff. Do you realize that? We just covered a whole bunch of stuff. I bet we covered more, and I bet you know more than you think you do. Let's see how much we remember. Chris, as we go through this, let me give the question, and then hopefully be able to show the answer after we've kind of responded to it, okay? So here we go in our memory review. Question 1, what does the word Genesis mean? Beginning or origin. All right, very good. Here's question 2. What are the 4 locations that summarize Genesis 1 through 11? Garden, fall, flood. Now listen, you guys, I'm kind of halfway impressed here. I mean, come on, you just learned. That's pretty important. That's pretty good. All right, question 3. What does the garden teach us? What does the garden teach us? God created everything good and made humanity in His. You got it. You got it. All right. Question 4. What does the fall teach us? Humanity rebelled against God's rightful rule. Okay? Because God rules over us, but sin and the fall is us rebelling against God's rightful rule. Here's question 5. What does the flood teach us? God judges sin, but He also shows grace or mercy. That's exactly right. God judges sin, but also shows grace. Here's question 6. What does the tower teach us? Humanity attempts to build life without God, but God remains sovereign over the nations. Do you see that? Let me say it again. Humanity attempts to build life without God, but God remains sovereign over the nations. Question 7. What does it mean to be made in God's image? We were created to reflect God. And do you remember what the other thing is? We reflect Him, and we, like an ambassador, we represent Him within His creation. Very good. And then here's question 8. What 3 words describe the spread of sin and how sin spreads? We said heart, home, and humanity. Very good. And then question 9. What are the 4 movements of the Bible's story? Creation, rebellion, redemption, restoration. Let's do the motions together. Here we go. Creation, rebellion, redemption, restoration. Do it again. Creation, rebellion, redemption, restoration. Very good. And I'm telling you that those 4 words, you can take those 4 words and you can go through your Bible and hit a spot, not know what it is, open it up, hit a spot, Judges. And you can read a little bit of Judges and you can say, okay, this is about rebellion. This is about rebellion, okay? You can open up to the book of Hosea and read a little bit about Hosea, and you can say, okay, I know what this is. This is about redemption. This is about a coming redemption in the future. Every place you can go in the Bible, one of these 4 words applies. Let's do it one more time. Creation, rebellion, redemption, restoration. Very good. All right, how about, we've got some discussion questions here, and I'm not going to ask all of them, but I'm going to ask at least a couple of them, and let's see if you guys have a thought here. What do you think the flood teaches us about both God's judgment and God's grace? Now, we're in a big room, and it may be a little bit hard to hear, but if you've got a thought on what the flood teaches us about both God's judgment and God's grace, share it with me. We'll experiment. Let's see if I can hear you. Let's see if we can hear one another. Does anybody have a thought on this? What does the flood teach us about both God's judgment and God's grace? Oh, that's excellent. So Angela said, because He is a righteous ruler, He's the authority, He's the creator, He did not have to provide an ark. He did not have to provide redemption or restoration. Why did He do that? What part of God's character resulted in Him providing an ark for Noah's family? His mercy and His grace. That's very good. Could you guys hear the question that Angela asked decently? Okay. Anybody else have a thought on that question? Paul?
He's not a wicked God, and He judges you. He's going to judge you. But He's a gracious and loving God. So, thankfully, He's shown grace.
Man, I think that's a great point. Sometimes we kind of build a God that's a little different than reality, don't we? Or we focus on one side of God and we kind of leave out the other side. That's really important to me as a pastor, as your pastor here at OBC. When I preach, when I teach, I work really hard to include both truth and grace, because I believe those 2 things are equally important in our understanding in our relationship with God. And I don't think that if I only teach truth, I don't think I'm doing a good job. And if I only teach grace, I don't think I'm doing a good job. And I want to do a good job when I lead you. And I want you to know that what Paul just said about that is really, really important to me. And I want it to be important to us.
And he could have just started over. I mean, he used this story
Yeah.
to teach us a lot.
Yes. God could have wiped everybody out and started completely over. Could God have created a second Adam and Eve? Oh, He created the first ones. Of course He could have, right? But He had promised Adam and Eve something, right? And so in order to keep that promise alive, there had to be a continuation. And that's why He provided the ark. It's really pretty amazing to think about. All right, in what ways do people still attempt to make a name for themselves apart from God? Can you think of some examples? I threw out a bunch of them. Can you think of any? Position. Okay, and that says position. What else? Names. Oh, okay. All right. Let's talk about something. Names on buildings. You ever? Christine's church that she grew up in has a building, or it did, with her grandfather's name on it. And he had died, and to honor him, they put his name on it, the Ken Tasker Educational Building or something like that. That's really sweet, isn't it? Isn't that nice? I believe, and I think the Bible teaches, that we need to be really careful about putting our name on things that really belong to God. And here's the problem. It doesn't last forever. That church came to Christine's family just in the last few months, I think, right, or the past year, and said, we really need to take his name off of that building. No one knows who he is anymore. And we've got a different name we think would be better than his name. How do you feel about that? Can you handle that? Is that And I'll be honest with you, Christine's like, rip it down. But some of her family was pretty offended. Wait a minute, you mean his name's not going to be there for eternity? What's the only thing that lasts for eternity? God. Actually, we last for eternity too, just not here. We last for eternity in heaven. Anything else you can think of that we try to make a name for ourselves? All right, very good. You guys have done a great job tonight. Let me give you a little bit of homework. It's there on your last page, homework and optional reading. I want you to continue to think through and memorize garden, fall, flood, tower. I want you to go over creation, rebellion, redemption, restoration. Okay? Practice those hand motions. I promise, if you feel like you look silly, you do. But it's going to help you. It's going to help you, okay? I've got some places in Genesis chapter 12 and beyond that I'd like you to read if you feel like it. If you're up to it, it'll be helpful. You're welcome to write down a question you have about Abraham or the patriarchs being Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, okay? I'm sorry, Abraham, I've forgotten my patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, sorry. And then some optional reading. Some of this is in the New Testament. Actually, all of this is in the New Testament. It connects to what we're going to learn next week. That's all there on your last page with homework and optional reading. Okay. Anything else before we go? Anything that we need to cover? Any questions? Have I confused you with anything? Okay. Guys, listen to me. I'm so thrilled with you being here. I'm so thrilled that you're interested in this. If you don't come back next week, I'm going to be devastated. I'm just kidding. There's no pressure. I assume I'm the only Bible nerd in here, and I assume that you guys are going to lose interest in this very soon. But if not, I'll be here, and I can't wait to teach, and I can't wait to learn with you and grow with you. This is one of those things, the more you put into it, I think the more you're going to get out of it. Let's pray together and we'll be dismissed tonight. Before we pray, I'm sorry, wait a second, before we pray. Paul Kirsch in here. Okay, Paul, can you give us any instructions we need for cleanup or finishing up?
We actually did most of it before we started, but it would be helpful if your table having been wiped down to wipe the table.
Where would they get stuff to wipe the table down with?
Really good question.
Do not give us instructions.